Sung Kwon, welcome to The Herd Has Spoken.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, it's truly an honor. We've known each other for a long time, since 2006, I believe, maybe 2007, but I like to believe 2006. So let's just dive into it. And I think going back in time is actually a good place for us to start, because my understanding is that at your parents' home, you've got what appears to be a set of encyclopedias, but it's actually the history of your family. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, about those quote unquote encyclopedias at your parents' house?
Yeah, sure. And it's the history of the family as in a family tree, not like a written narrative of the family history. So you open it up, and it's just branches, 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 right? All leading up to our first ancestor in the Kwon clan. And I'm the 35th generation in my clan. So it is like an encyclopedia set. You can imagine how many books and volumes it would take to capture that history, that genealogy going back 35 generations. It's pretty impressive. So, you'll see my father, who he's married to, all my siblings, all my aunts, uncles. It's very well organized. It's amazing how they came up with the system.
Well, you certainly come by it honestly. You're someone who has a fantastic attention to detail, and clearly your family, that's something that's important across the family. But I'd love to hear to you in your own words, what does family mean to you? Because you're someone who has the ability to go back 35 generations. That's not something that most of us have. In fact, I'd be surprised if anyone listening can go back 35 generations. So you have a very unique view on being maybe even more connected to your past and your ancestors than a lot of us. So what does family mean to you?
I'll answer with a couple of responses, right? I think kind of the most immediate thought is, the family that I have, right? I've got two young kids, married to my wife Akiko. Kids are 6 and 2, right? So I'm starting to learn that nuclear family and what it means to provide for them, what it means to be a father, what it means to protect them and give them what they need for life. But I think you were alluding to this connection to this broader family, right? And that's a very real thing for me. Growing up, it was always drilled into me that, hey, you got to bring respect, and you got to make your family proud, right? Don't bring shame to your family. There's 35 generations on your shoulders, right? that I don't want to call it a burden, but that expectation that you've got to live up to all the things that the prior generations have done, right? That your legacy is going to last forever, right? So it didn't matter if it was some small homework assignment or the biggest project of my career. You treat everything with the same kind of intensity, the same kind of focus, and the same kind of respect that any venture deserves, right? And that's kind of been the motivating factor for me in many things that I do.
So is it safe to say that for you growing up and to this day now, you're not trying to create a better life for you and your family as a primary goal, although I'm sure that's important to you. But the primary goal for you is to honor your family and the 34 generations that came before you that are part of your family.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say the two are divorced from each other, right? I think part of me honoring that legacy is taking care of my family, providing for my family, and making sure that my son, my daughter, the 36th generation, that they're going to make a difference in this world, right?
Right.
And that comes from trying to raise a good family that knows how to respect others, their surroundings, works hard, tries to make an impact in this world. But you're right. I think in the broader sense, it's I used to love watching Bruce Lee growing up, right? He was a childhood hero of mine, and there was a quote he had. It was like, immortality is living a life worth remembering, right? And if you've done that, I'm probably wrong. Your podcast viewers are probably like that idiot. You didn't get the quote right, but something to that effect, right? Like, hey, that's how you leave your name in the history books, is doing something that makes an impact in this world, right? That's my version of that quote. And I think that's really being driven by, that upbringing of, hey, you gotta, people are watching you. You've got an entire clan that's watching you.
Hmm.
And that kind of expands to, hey, make a difference in this world. And then you've done your part in life.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that, right? So by you doing well for yourself and your family,
Yeah.
that's bringing honor and that's adding to your family's legacy. And I want to talk a little bit about your experience with your family and growing up. So I know you grew up in suburban Chicago, and I know you're actually born in Korea. So
Yeah.
what was that experience like? And can you um, maybe tell me a little bit what it was like, what you saw your parents and specifically your dad going through and sacrificing to help you and your family be in an even better position for that next generation.
Yeah. Um, so my parents got married and started having kids in the 70s. So it was, 20-ish years after the Korean War. And at that time, Korea was devastatingly poor. You didn't have the economic growth yet. Really, around the time of the '88 Olympics, that's when things kind of kicked off. Right, it was a pretty great place to live now, but not back then. Right, and add on top of that, my older brother, he has Down syndrome, and at that time in the 70s, 80s in Korea, there wasn't much of an infrastructure for people like my brother. Contrast that to, here in the States, where you've got special education programs in schools. He's obviously much older now. He's my older brother. He's 2-3 years older than me. Um, and obviously he's not in the school system anymore, but the adult work programs for people with disabilities, all these things that help to enrich his life and give him the most out of life. None of that existed in Korea, right? So that was a big motivator for my parents to move over here. It was really with the objective of giving our family a better life. They don't come from a wealthy family by any means. Both of them came from really large families, 5-6 siblings on each side. Came over here to Chicago, few bucks in the pocket. I mean, my father still loves telling stories. Like when we look at our picture book, we'll see like these plaid bell bottoms look pretty hip. I went dumpster diving. I picked them out the first week I was in Chicago. So very humble beginnings. Both my parents for a long time worked blue collar jobs. My mother worked in a factory that makes dental instruments. So she was working, machines, presses to make those instruments. My father, his first gig was making labels for milk cartons, milk jugs. It was tough, financially. I mean, we weren't begging, right? But financially, they were always working, right?
Right.
And especially around the time when I was in high school, as they're getting ready to put me and my younger sister through college, right? They're trying to save up. And, my parents at one point, they had, my mother, for example, had 3 jobs at one time. She worked in her day job at the dental instrument company, come home at night and paint little tiny fish hooks, like paint them in fluorescent colors, a couple pennies a piece. And then on the weekends, both my father and my mother would go clean car dealerships, right? They'd rent a bunch of vacuums and cleaning supplies and go do some janitorial services. So it was a unique upbringing. I didn't get as much personal time as some of my friends did, but it set an interesting example of what it means to work hard. And my father, I would say, you asked about my father in particular, very proud guy, but I think there were moments in his life that caused him to be very introspective. And those are the moments that I remember, because he imparted a lot of good life lessons at those moments. One in particular was my father got passed up for a job. He on paper seemed to be the more qualified candidate.
Sure.
and who knows, I don't know if it was language, I don't know if it was something else, but he felt like because he was an immigrant, that's kind of what impacted his role. And of course he's pissed, in the beginning. Any proud guy would be, a little bit of swearing, a little bit of drinking.
It happens to the best of us, right?
Yeah. No, I can personally attest to that, right? But when he calmed down, we talked about it because I was taking it personally, right? Growing up, you always see your father as like this invincible superhero, and
Right.
this is a moment where I saw some that image of that invincible superhero there was a little crack in it,
A little
right?
vulnerability he's
A
exposed.
little vulnerability, exactly. So I think he recognized that, and we talked, and he said, you know what? What's important is your reaction here, right? We as immigrants, we may have to work twice as hard to get what we need or get what we want, right? We have to overcome the language barrier. We have to assimilate with the culture. Those are all things that growing up in America, if you were a Native American, you wouldn't have to deal with, right? But that's our lot in life. We chose to do that. That was a conscious decision. So let's not mope about it, right? Let's be positive about it and move on. And man, that was a real powerful lesson.
Yeah, I mean, you touched upon a couple of things here that I'd like to maybe underscore and dig into a little bit. I think that the first thing I think a lot of listeners can relate to if they're parents is the fear of not being able to spend enough time with their children. Because what I'm hearing you say is you didn't get a ton of time with your parents because they had to work nonstop as immigrants in the US to try to provide for you and a sibling with Down syndrome and the family. That just required a hell of a lot of work and effort. And it's really hard as immigrants because a lot of your degrees, even if they've been earned overseas, don't translate here in the US. And so it's tough to get a job. And the fact that this made such a positive impact on you, I think one of the old adages, do as I say, not as I do. But we all know people learn the opposite, right? We learn by seeing what people are doing. And, this is one of the things I hope listeners can take from what you're saying, which is, wow, like you're someone who's tremendously successful, went to Caltech for engineering school, went to Chicago Booth for his MBA, works for a big aerospace, company, now doing fantastic things, spent 7 years at McKinsey, the top management consulting firm in the world, arguably. And you did a lot of that because of hard work, and you learned that from watching your parents, not necessarily having to spend all that time with them. And of course, like time with your kids is good. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I think this is such a great reminder to parents that what you do day to day, where you spend your time, is going to impact your children a hell of a lot more than something that you're saying when you're spending time together. And to me, that's just a great testament to the type of father that you were blessed with, and the opportunity that we all have in front of us to make sure our actions reflect what we want to teach to others. So I think that's really powerful.
Really well said. And what we didn't talk about as much is what we did outside of the time, my parents were working, and it was limited, but when we had that time, we made the best of it. My father was a huge Cubs fan, and therefore I'm a huge Cubs fan.
Go Cubs.
My mother worked, go Cubs, right? And my mother worked a few blocks away from Wrigley. So we were always, we grew up in that area, right? I moved to the suburbs when I was in my teenage years. So we're Northsiders for most of my early years. And we were always at Wrigley because it was just a neighborhood thing for us. And those are the things that I remember. And when we weren't there, my dad was religious about videotaping every single Cubs game. And I remember one time there was like a huge thunderstorm and like the cable went out and he couldn't watch his Cubs game. He was pissed and he was like in his broken English calling the cable company like, you need to fix this now, right? This is all when the Cubs sucked. Now they're a lot better, so it's fun. But it's I attribute that to my father, right? All those fond memories. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And one other thing that you mentioned that I think is really cool is how how your father handled adversity. So
Yeah.
first, like, yeah, look, we're all gonna get mad. We're all gonna hear, you know, our dad say shit when they hammer a finger or they're upset. I mean, that happens, right? I mean, in an ideal world, we wouldn't do that, but it's human to experience emotion. I don't think there's anything wrong with experiencing emotion and you know, letting your family members and those close to you see that you're going to get upset. There's things that bother you, and sure as heck, getting passed up for a promotion is something that's worthy of some emotion as human. So there's nothing wrong with that. But to to take that as a teaching moment, you know, especially, you know, as an immigrant, to say like, no, okay, this is unfortunate, but what can we learn from this? And what we can learn from this is that we need to work twice as hard. We need to continue to be, you know, patient. We need to see things through and recognize that if we keep working hard and keep doing things right, good things will happen. And like, more so than that lesson in particular, I think it's being able to like recognize when you're in a tough situation and communicate that openly to your children. I mean, that's something that's super powerful, and I'm sure has left, you know, a really big impression on you. Obviously, as you're talking about your father and some of the impact that he's had on you, that's still something that you're feeling today. Um, so
Really well said. Yeah, really well said.
so yeah, I would love to, you know, kind of hear maybe from you um, in some of the more challenging moments or some of the down points that you've had as you've gone through your career, right? So um, everyone, regardless of what job they're in, what profession is, where they're looking for a job, like we've all been through those challenging periods. But I think like for someone like you, it's easy from the outside to look and be like, yeah, Osung, he's super successful. I know that guy's, you know, doing great things, and I do know you're doing great things. But I also know that that's not the way the world works. It's not a success only journey, and there's challenges along the way. So I'd love to hear maybe a moment where you've been particularly challenged, you know, whether it's personal, professional, whatever the case may be. Maybe some times where you've experienced a gut punch.
Um, you know, you mentioned Caltech, and whenever I hear Caltech, you know, the half of it is this fondness because I had a great experience there, but the other half is like I tremble because it was such a tough experience for me. You know, undergrad, I went to Illinois for mechanical engineering. Very well suited to kind of the way I think. I like to visualize things, gear, structures, what have you, right? But it's easy for me to get my head around stuff like that. Contrast that to what I studied at Caltech was electrical engineering. And at the time, you know, I was working for an aerospace company, designing radar systems. So it made sense to get into electrical engineering. That's kind of the company's focus.
Sure.
Um, and there was you know, you don't see electricity, you don't see electromagnetic waves, you don't see current, right? So it just it wasn't how my brain was wired. On top of that, you know, I didn't really have a foundation in electrical engineering, right? I tried to avoid as much of that during my undergrad. Um, and here I am at Caltech, a very, you know, prestigious school with a lot of kids a ton smarter than me with the background in electrical engineering. So it was tough just to keep up. You know, I was taking classes at the local community college in the evening on the electrical engineering kind of basics, how to create
You're
circuits.
going to Caltech for a master's degree, and
Yep,
you're studying at the local community college to try to get the basic entry
yep,
level knowledge to be successful.
that's right. Yeah, exactly. So I'm in there, and it's like, you know, it's not, they don't have fancy labs like Caltech. It felt like a high school science lab, and I'm sitting there creating circuits, right? That's how I was trying to get up to par
That's scrappy.
with the fellow students.
That is
Um,
scrappy.
you know, and look, it wasn't all me. Had a ton of friends there, a ton of professors that just invested their time in helping me. Um, on top of that, going to work, the commute, you know, where I was working by LAX up to Pasadena, where Caltech is, that round trip was, you know, hour and a half a day. So it was really, really challenging the 2 years that I did it. I mean, there were times where I literally was walking downstairs and blacking out, and it just, well worth it, because I think it was like being in a crucible and coming out of it. It just made me that much, not even around the education itself, but just as a person, as a man, here's what you're made of, you can do it. It was a formative experience for me.
So I want to come back to you getting out of that crucible, but for a second, I got to ask the question that a lot of people listening, I'm sure, have to ask too. So you were blacking out as you were going downstairs. So what does that mean? Like, you hadn't slept in days, or what's going on at this low point, at this low moment when you're at Caltech, getting your ass kicked and trying to just get that education that you so dearly wanted?
Yeah. So my company paid for my school, working while I was going to school. And, a lot of schools, I think, they have programs set up for working professionals. You could go in the evenings, more flexible hours. Caltech didn't have that. Like, I think they just assumed when you go to Caltech, you're going full time, right? So it was getting up at 3 a.m, driving down to work, putting in 8 hours, right? It wasn't full time. I was working probably about 30 hours a week. So call it, 75% kind of hours. But
Sure.
going down, working, racing back, because obviously I can't do morning classes, right? So I'm trying to cram in all the afternoon classes, get there for the afternoon classes. Then you've got to do all your homework sets and your lab work in the evening. So very little sleep. I had a fast food rotation. Taco Bell Mondays, like Carl's Jr. Tuesday, right? So on and so forth. So I was eating like crap. I wasn't working out, none of that stuff. And yeah, there were just days where I'm like walking down the stairs at work, and I would just grab the rail, because I would black out and I had to sit down for a few minutes just until my senses came back to me.
Oh man, that's crazy. So really challenging experience. You really put yourself out there, just for folks who might not have the context of LA, you're basically adding at least an hour and a half of commute time to this every day, in addition to working full time and going to two colleges at the same time, including one that's, as good as it gets when it comes to engineering. So you're stretched, hella thin at this moment, but somehow one foot in front of the other, day by day, week by week, you just keep laying the bricks until at the end you've got a wall. You've got that degree. So what do you take from that time now when you look back at it? So what characteristic that you use today do you feel like you built during those low times? Because I feel like there's so many of us that we're going through these low times, and it's tough to know what the hell we're going to get out of it. But the
Yeah.
reality is, I mean, that's when you're growing, right? Like, when you're in the midst of those toughest times and you're finding the inches, you're finding a way to go just one more round. And that's really when you're growing as a person. You have no idea, because it's just really hard at that moment. So now that you're on the other side, you've come out of that crucible, where do you think you've improved as a man?
You said it very well, because it is a crucible. I mean, it almost feels like the term that comes to mind is you're being forged, right?
Yeah.
You're in this heat and you're getting hammered and slammed and shaped, and then at times you don't feel like you're growing, you feel like you're shrinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you come out of it, and you're rock solid, right? You're just that much better because of that experience. What I took away from it, and it's interesting because at the time I thought what I needed to take away from it was all that electrical engineering theory and calculations and principles. The funny thing is, I never spent a day in my life working as an electrical engineer. I graduated and I
Check.
got put into systems engineering, right? Which is, you're supposed to be kind of more of a jack of all trades, right? Familiar with different engineering disciplines. It made sense, right? Because I had this
For
multi-discipline
sure.
background for engineering. But really, all that stuff I learned didn't matter. What mattered was that experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think my advice for people going through that kind of similar forging experience is persevere. As you said, just one step in front of the other. You will come out of it. You will become stronger for it. But while you're doing it, don't be too hard on yourself, because that experience is wonderful. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. So as you know, Osung, I'm the son of a Navy captain. And so my father fought in two different wars,
Mhm.
and including time in Vietnam. And one of the things he used to always say is, war is hell. And you just can't appreciate it until you've seen it. And one of the things I admired about my father so much was when big things happened, if a car was wrecked or something meaningful happened, he was always extremely calm. And he might have a temper about small, stupid stuff back in the day. And as I've gotten a little bit older, I've had a chance to reflect on that a little bit. And I'm convinced that's because he went through war. I mean, literally went through war and saw people being killed, and saw people spending every ounce of waking energy trying to kill another person. And when you have that sort of perspective and you've been through that, you realize that your 17-year-old son, running into a rock is not that big of a deal. He's safe, he's sound. And I think in our career, when you go through hard times and when you get the shit kicked out of you, it just makes you be able to understand and appreciate things at the with the amount of perspective that's appropriate. So you can detach from the situation. I know this is something that you're a big fan of, is the whole idea of like, go to the balcony, right?
Right.
And that's something that we learned at University of Chicago. We're turning this into a University of Chicago podcast here, but I think there's a great lesson. Like, hey, when in business or in any tense situation, try to detach from the situation and get some perspective. So I think what you're saying is really resonates with me in terms of the perspective that you gained by being forged in that crucible, and that's powerful stuff for sure. I think we can all relate to that. Okay, I want to switch gears here and wrap up with kind of a few last questions for you. So number one is, what is it that Osung today knows that 20-year-old Osung did not know?
It's a good question. I'd have to say it's that the world is a big place, right? And there are many paths that you can take. Be open, just continue to be curious, and it will lead you down. You'll experience wonderful things if you could have a positive attitude about it. I gave one example of how there was a little bit of a twist where I came out of Caltech thinking I was going to do electrical engineering and didn't do a day of it, right? But there's been a lot of that in my life and my career. It's been a bit of a random walk, right? I went to
For sure.
business school thinking I would go back into industry. Thought I would do kind of a corporate role, but found out about consulting, right? Thought I'd do that for a couple of years. That ended up being 7 years, right? And I thought that was going to be the life for me. I enjoyed consulting quite a bit. And then I had started my family.
Right.
About the time my son was a year old, and it was that lifestyle just wasn't going to work out. I didn't think me growing up, in Chicago, LA, living in San Francisco, I moved to some small town here in the East Coast, but that's where I am today, right? And none of that was planned. The advice I often got was, hey, write your resume from, what you want it to be in 5 years, right?
Right.
And go and try to hit all those steps so that you can make it there and visualize that future. That never worked out for me. I tried that, and it's always been something different, but I don't regret it one bit, because every experience has been rewarding. So I would tell my 18-year-old self, don't stress too much, about the twists and turns in life. Work on problems that are interesting, work hard so that you can make a difference, and everything else will take care of itself.
And burn the 5-year plan, because it doesn't mean anything anyways.
Burn it. Don't stress about it. Burn it. Yeah.
I love it. All right. So what is your biggest pet peeve?
So my biggest pet peeve would be, I think personally in my personal life, it's when I see my kids procrastinating. It drives the the heck out of me. They don't get the concept of, hey, if I just spend the time doing this now, it's an investment because it frees up my time to go play or what
Right.
have you. Professionally, I think it's people that just kind of react. I'm a big fan of taking a step back, like you said, go to the balcony, look at a problem dispassionately, try to structure how you think about the problem, how you go solve it, and don't be emotional and just react. That I would say is my pet peeve professionally.
I love it. I love it. Well, here at MuskOx, as you know, we're all about getting outside, living the adventure, whatever that may mean, and that this means a lot of different things to different people. So, Osung, what does roaming freely mean to you?
Um, Roaming freely.
Meaning, just like
I,
what do you do for
yeah.
adventure to get outside and recognizing that for so many of us, we've got a lot of commitments and you'd love to do a lot of different things, but we're going after that day-to-day adventure these days.
Yeah, a lot of it is tied up with my kid, right? Because the current environment with COVID, there isn't much interaction outside the family. Plus, your kids kind of have you as their friend, as their teacher, as their provider, right? So, things I've been doing a lot lately is souping up Nerf guns and
Nice.
playing Nerf war with my kid. I did go golfing for the first time this year. I actually live in a neighborhood where there's a golf course, and I would typically go 2-3 times a month. This year I hadn't gone at all until a couple days ago, and I took my kid out, and that was a ton of fun. So yeah, pretty simple stuff, but it's awesome. Got to have that balance, right?
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And balance obviously changes. Last question for you, Osung. So, what's the best piece of advice that you've received, whether it's from a mentor, a parent, a coach, me during our, no, but I'd love to hear what's the one piece of advice that really resonates with you?
Well, look, I would say, I do want to say I learned a ton from you.
Oh, come on, come
No,
on.
no, 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 no shitting around here. Um, for the listeners, Brad is the most dependable, got your back. I don't care what time it is. I'll be there to support you kind of guy there is. So, you know, I, I told you my earlier point about being trying to be very dispassionate, remove myself from a problem, be very logical about it. Sometimes it's a double-edged sword, right? Because I'm not a super emotional person. Sometimes it's harder for me to connect with people and that emotional level, right? And you're one of my role models when it comes to like how to best connect with people, and not in a cheesy way, right? But just in a genuine way. This like conversation you and I are having right now, it's like we could be having this at a bar, and it's that same level of interest that you take in people. So yes, that's a good piece of advice I got from you. The other thing I would say is what I already mentioned, right? One of my mentors here, my current role, right? Very successful in the company, and being new to the company, I've been there now 4 years. But I asked him when I was there earlier on, hey, what's your secret for success? And he said, look, don't worry too much about the politics. Don't worry about all that noise. Put your head down, work hard. If you're smart, you'll do a good job. And if you do a good job, people want you to work the hardest problems, the most interesting problems. And if you're working the hardest, most interesting problems, people are going to notice you. And all that just kind of feeds itself, right? So as long as you do that, everything else will take care of itself, which I said earlier. But that's the thing that stuck with me and resonated with me the most.
Well, I couldn't think of a better note to end on. I mean, work hard, do good work. You're going to get noticed. It's going to pay off in the long run, right? Don't get caught up in the day-to-day BS. Don't get caught up in political nonsense. Do your job. Do it well. Good things will happen. So
and connect with people like Brad has
I appreciate it, Musk. I appreciate it, Osung. MuskOx, we live in a herd, so it's important to have a fantastic, friends around you, and we're certainly fortunate to have you part of the MuskOx herd, and I'm fortunate to have you as part of mine. So, Osung, thanks so much for the time today. Fun catching up with you as always, and we will see you on the other side.